All right, today we're going to look at section 4.7, which is investigating negative exponents. So after today, we should be able to write expressions using negative exponents or turn negative exponents into positive and write it as a positive exponent. We'll also be able to evaluate numerical expressions containing the negative exponents. So when we first started this chapter, we wanted to simplify a problem like this, right? We said we could do, right? I could do this right here, and then this would cancel, this would cancel, this would cancel, meaning that x over x is just 1. So we'd be left with a 1 on top, and 2x's on bottom would be x squared. So I could write this as 1x squared. Well, yesterday we looked at subtracting exponents, right? And we said we could take the 5 and subtract the 3. The 5's bigger, it ended up on bottom. Well, we could also just say, okay, this is 3 minus 5, and that would give me x to the negative 2. So this and this are the exact same thing, right? And it's tough to look at with variables. So what we'll do is we'll start with numbers so we can see what happens when we plug that into a calculator. Remember, 2 to the third power is simply 2 times 2 times 2, and that should give us 8. 2 squared would be 2 times 2, which is 4. 2 to the first is just 2. 2 to the 0, right? That's our special case, right? Anything to the 0 power is 1. Now, 2 to the negative first, all right? I mean, if you kind of just think about it, a lot of times I get, okay, what's 2 to the negative first? Negative 2. And that answer is not correct. So I'm going to bring you over to the Desmos graphing calculator so we can see a lot of these at the same time. So for example, we started out with 2 raised to the third, and we get 8. We had 2 raised to the second, and that was 4. 2 raised to the first. We can go 2 raised to the 0, which is 1. Now, here's what we really want to look at. 2 raised to the negative first. Okay, we see 0.5. So it's actually a decimal, okay, right? Which a decimal less than 1 or a fraction less than 1. And what's nice about decimals is you have this button over here that'll click it and it'll convert that to a fraction for me. So it's really 1/2. And 2 to the negative 2, right? If we go back here, we can say 2 raised to the negative 2. Okay, 0.25, so another decimal, right? Which is really 1/4. Right, let's talk about 2 to the negative third. What would you guess it would be, right? So if 2 to the first was 2, 2 to the negative 1/2 was 1/2. 2 to the second was 4, 2 to the negative 2 is 1/4. 2 to the third is 8, so 2 to the negative third should be 1/8, right? So our rule with negative exponents is that I can move it from numerator to denominator, denominator to numerator, and it becomes positive. So x to the negative fifth, let me change color so we can see what we're doing here. X to the negative fifth is the same as 1 over x to the fifth. All right, so let me relate that to what we just did here. 2 to the negative first is really 1 over 2 to the first, right? That's where the 1/2 comes from. 2 to the negative 2 is really 1 over 2 squared. That's why it becomes 1/4. 2 to the negative third would be 1 over 2 to the third, right? And 2 to the third was 8, so it would be 1 over 8. That's where that decimal or fraction comes in. So if we look here, x to the negative 13 simply be 1 over x to the 13. Notice a couple things. If it's negative, right, this is really over 1. I move it to the bottom, and it becomes a positive value. So here, I would have 1 over negative 3 to the third, right? And when they're numbers, you can represent them. This is fine. You can represent them like that. But that would be the same as negative 1 over 27, right? Because negative 3 to the third, right, is really negative 27. Here, so 2 to the negative second power would be 1 over 2 squared, right, which is good, right? Or you could represent that as 1/4, right, because 2 squared is 4. Now, here we have 1 over x to the negative 4th. So really, to write that with a positive exponent, I would move it to the top, and it would just become x to the 4th. Now, looking at 6, 7, 8, and 9, we're going to look at how to represent these situations with negative exponents, right? So if I have 1 over 9, I could, right, could write that as 9 to the negative first, right? And that negative brings it up to the top. You could write that, right? I know that 9 is also 3 times 3, right? Which is 3 squared. So if I wanted to write that as a negative exponent, right, I move it to the top, and that would be 3 to the negative 2. So take a minute and see if you could represent number 7, 8, and 9. Nope, hold off on 9, sorry. 7 and 8 using negative exponents. So pause the video here and see if you can write it, right? Even number 7, see if you can come up with more than one way. All right, let's look here at number 7, right? So the 16, right, is really to the first power. So if I want to write it with a negative exponent, I move that to the top, it'd be a negative exponent of 1. Okay, now that's fine. We just want to have the concept of I can take this number on the bottom, move it to the top, and write it with a negative exponent, and these two are equivalent. But also wanted to recognize that 16 can be written as 4 times 4, right? That would give me the base of 4. There's 2 of them, so I could write that as 4 to the negative 2. These are also equivalent. And I can see how I can break that down even further, right? This 4 is 2 times 2, and this 4 is 2 times 2. I could represent it as 2 to the negative 4th power. So all of these are the exact same, okay? Now, where 3, okay, is a prime number, it's not a perfect square, perfect cube, or anything like that. So the only way I could represent this is, right, that's 3 to the first power. If I want to write it in the numerator, I need 3 to the negative first power. So then those two would be saying the same thing. Now, 4 to the negative first, if I want to write that, it already has a negative exponent. So if I want to write that with positive, one way I could do that, right, is just move it to the bottom, right? 1 over 4 to the first. So if there's a negative, right, and that's really in the numerator, you move it down to the denominator, it becomes positive exponent. If I look back at number 5, I had a negative exponent in the denominator. I move it up to the numerator. Notice it becomes positive. Okay, so what we have to remember with negative exponents, it does not change the sign at all. It does not make this a negative of any sorts. It just moves it between the numerator and the denominator. All right, so meaning if I change levels on a fraction, right, 2 squared, right, if I were to want to write that with a negative, right? I move it to the bottom of the fraction, and there it is, right? Those are the same thing, right? I move it back up, it becomes positive. So when you change levels, it changes the exponent from positive to negative, okay? It does not mean, right, if I say 2 to the negative third power, it is not equal to negative 8. It has nothing to do with a positive and negative value. All right, so let's look at some evaluate. All right, so it says evaluate the following, gives me values for each variable. So the first one, n, which is 2 to the negative fourth power. Okay, and I don't want to write it as a decimal. So I'm going to first change it to a positive exponent. So 1 over 2 to the fourth. So that would be 1 on top, 2 to the fourth, right, would be 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, right, which is 16. Right, either of those are correct. You'll most likely see it written in fraction form on an answer key. So see if you can do 2 and 3, right? So pause the video here and check your work. All right, so we'll check here, right? Plug in 3 for m in example 2. Okay, so 3 to the negative third. I put that on the bottom, right? I know that 3 to the third is 27. Either of these are ways to represent that situation, right? Most of the time you'll see it like that, but either way is fine. P to the negative 2, right? So I plug in 4. Okay, put that on the bottom of the fraction. Right, either way, 1 over 4 squared or 1 over 16 is the way to represent that. Number 4, we have n is 2 and m is 3. So I got to multiply them first, right, which is 6 raised to the negative first. So I'm going to move that down, 1 over 6 to the first. Remember, if the exponent's 1, you don't really need it, so either of those would be fine. All right, your assignment, okay, your assignment is section 4.7. It's on page 183 to start, and you can do the following numbers there. All right, this is the last section that we're going to cover in chapter 4. All right, from here we'll have a quick check, practice test. We'll have an extra credit opportunity, and then we have our test next Tuesday. All right, so let me know if you have any questions. Hope you have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.